Okay, so we're ready to get started. Marshall introduced us, but I'm Nathaniel Holmes. Co-presenting with me today is Kyron Pagalayan, and assisting us are going to be Matthew Clark and Slyman Ahmed. They'll be available to answer questions in the chat, bring things to our attention as needed. This is reporting and certification specifically, right? So the target audience are the data coordinators, those who submit data to CALPADS regularly, and those of you who are new to CALPADS. The distinction is we have a Fall 2 Advanced for those who are experienced users or the more experienced data coordinators, for those who are confident and only need an update. They don't need longer training. Slyman delivers the Fall 2 Advanced in 45 to 1 minutes to 1 hour. So it's very condensed. So if you're in this training because you don't need it and it's the last one, you just decided to come, always consider going to the advanced. So again, this is the training sequence. Any of our trainings probably have the training sequence slide. And it's just to help you understand the prerequisite material. So highlighted, we have Fall 1 or Fall 2 kind of in orange. And everything to the left, we would consider prerequisite information. So you would have to understand how the data is populated for Fall 2, right? Naturally, before going on to reporting and certification. And to populate Fall 2 data, there's some basic functionality that you would have to understand, like file submission, reports, anomalies management, features and navigation, so on and so forth. And then orientations more general for people who are just being introduced to CALPADS or administration who may not go into CALPADS often. So, and then skill building, we're building this out much to our chagrin. We have new assignments, so we'll be focused on developing skill building material and resources in the near future. So let's talk about the objectives of today's training. By the end of today's training, we expect you all to be able to identify the source systems, to connect data and stakeholders across the ecosystem. So having members in your LA understand how their data relates to the larger picture. So that might mean talking to human resources and asking them to update the student information system with staff information or curriculum instruction, assigning the appropriate course code and student information, so on and so forth. We want you to be able to transform the data so that it conforms to the standards and requirement through data curation, gather, inventory, organize, and validate during the submission. So data curation is a step further than just submitting data. It's actually being able to collect and gather information and then present it to where it's useful and valid information. And so that's the transformation that's happening there, is you're turning the data into information. So that could be something as simple as filtering a report before giving it to someone, so that they're getting specifically what they need and not extra extemporaneous information or data. Then, of course, you need to be able to resolve certification errors as part of the Fall 2 process or any of the submission processes. This is best done with a systematic approach using analytical mindfulness. This would be an example of critical thinking. Nothing is straightforward in CALPADS. You all should know that if this is even your second day. And so we always have to consider more than what's on the surface level with our submission, with our reporting, right? Most of the guidance is very general and broad. It's, still the most populous state in the nation. So there's many different scenarios to consider. So you have to apply the guidance as best you can. And then, everyone has access to their district's data, right? It's a multitude of information, data sets, so on and so forth. And so we expect data coordinators to lead the submission and the approval process. This would require you to develop local procedures for reporting. You're going to want to establish a network of stakeholders to assess the data's value and accuracy prior to certifying the Fall 2 snapshot. So I think the hardest thing for data coordinators is eliciting support. At the end, when it's come times to certify, everybody wants you to click the button. Hardly anybody wants to review the reports, provide feedback. And so if you find yourself in this type of situation, you have to continue to strive to relate the importance of the data to those subject matter experts. There's various methods of going about this, but you have to continue to try without a negative result, because in the end, they'll come along once you get that negative result. All right, so let's talk about what we have in store for today's agenda. We're going to begin with an overview, then we'll go into the details about the data submission, and then we'll provide an example of the certification process, resolve some errors, demonstrate and discuss how to certify, of course, similar to Fall 1 minus the CELPA, and then do a reports review. And then we'll just recount some key points with the wrap up. All right, so we're going to jump right into the overview. So every submission in CALPADS is driven by legislation and the need for accountability, right? So for Fall 2, some of the key products or some of the key reasons why we submit the data is we generate information for the School Accountability Report Card, the SARC, average class size, UC CSU enrollment, things like that, identifying the AP courses that they show up on the SARC that every student succeeds at. You have Title III requirements, and we identify inexperienced teachers. The U.S. Department of Education Office of Civil Rights ensures that we meet our obligation of monitoring ELs through reports or reported data from Fall 2. And then, of course, CalSAS, administered by the CTC, is making sure that we have the appropriately authorized teachers. They are credentialed. So, those are the main drivers of Fall 2. It's important to consider all the people involved with the data collection, right? When we talk about connecting people across the ecosystem, this little diagram shows us just or highlights those different groups of staff members, right? So you have the school site staff, right? The administration in charge of the teaching staff. You're going to have human resources providing the demographic information related to our teachers, and then you have other program staff. For Fall 2, that could be English learners, your special ed, curriculum and instruction again. So generally, these staff members may not have access to each other on a general basis. So you're in a position where you have to connect them potentially and the data so that it can all be reported to CalPADS. And then just the key dates. So we call this Fall 2, right? It's the dead of winter. It's freezing cold, although it's sunny outside. It's probably my least favorite season, but we call it Fall 2 because we're looking back to the fall. Fall 2 and Fall 1 share the same census day. So keep that in mind when we're reporting data. We're looking back to October 5th. The snapshots revisions began on January 3rd, right? So just as many of us were trying to finish Fall 1 and looking at all the disapproved and LA approved snapshots and December 20th and all that, snapshots have been running, slowing down Fall 1. And now the current deadline is February 24th. Basically, we have less than a month, right? So just work diligently. I would say my best estimation that the deadline is tenuous, right? A month is a tight window. Not many people will be done, but if you have problems, if you need direction, submit a service request. It is possible to get it done in a month. All right, so we just went over some key dates. Where would you find this information in November or October, right? So at the start of every school year, you can always find information of your upcoming data collections or submission in the CalPADS user manual. So you can see there's a Fall 1 roadmap and a Fall 2 roadmap. Sometimes the homepage may look different according to what time of year it is. So if you were ever to just type in Fall 2, the roadmap would be here somewhere if it's not on the homepage and you can find it. And so within the Fall 2 roadmap is the calendar. And so this is all the dates. So if you're forecasting for end of year, you can see that calendar information is there as well. So if you're new, the roadmap includes important information. It has links to flash messages. It has a list of the files that you need to submit. So these are links to section in the user manual, this document itself, that will describe staff demographics, the functionality. You can download the checklist. There's general information, staff who should be reported, staff who should not be reported, so on and so forth. It's a great resource. And we'll come back to this probably a couple times in today's training. Again, if you're unfamiliar, you're new, it's the CALPADS user manual. And the other resource is the CALPADS system documentation page. The calendar is updated towards the start of the year, usually in August. And if we click the calendar link, you can see this is where we get it from to add to the user manual. Other important dates, like when the service desk will be closed. Key dates right here for me. You want to be familiar with those resources. So moving on into the data submission, we'll go into a little bit more detail, but this is where the data population that Matt recorded is great. Also on YouTube, we have trainings for each specific file set. So demographic, assignment, course, student course enrollment, and PTS, post-secondary PSTS. We have more in-depth trainings for each of these data submissions, but Matt did one that encapsulates the entire Fall 2 submission. So you can find those on YouTube. And those are going to be the required files. Notice that they're different from Fall 1. So as you saw highlighted in the user manual in the Fall 2 roadmap, staff and courses reported. So for Fall 2, only certificated staff active as of census day are reported. So, your classified staff isn't reported through CalPADS or reported, I think, through CBEDS Aura. And staff that come after census day or leave before census day should be excluded from Fall 2. As far as post-secondary status is reported, during Fall 2, the focus is on CTE and California Partnership Academy students who have completed and left completely, right? So these are often your graduate students. Special education has a survey of post-secondary students, but that's reserved for end of year 4, often done at the start of May. So it distinguishes the two different PSTS data collections. And then what order should the Fall 2 files be submitted? And we emphasize should because since last May, with the post redesign, the relationships binding the sequence of submission have been altered. And so you will receive errors that do not prevent the submission. They'll be there, but you can submit the files in any order. But you're going to have to play the waiting game and contend with a lot of errors to resolve themselves. If you submit them in this sequence here, you will reduce the likelihood of data discrepancy. So I would recommend starting with the staff demographic, completing that submission. This means not submitting one file, but making sure your entire demographic submission is complete. This might be several iterations of the file, right? It may be a single upload. I don't know what that would look like. Then you would move on to staff assignments. Again, you want to report all your staff assignments. It may take multiple attempts. You might submit your staff assignments, do some reconciliation, see that 2 staff members aren't reported. Oftentimes, when you're submitting staff demographic and staff assignments, you don't account for staff that are not on the master schedule. Kyron will talk about that later. So when you're submitting those, this is when you want to account for those staff members. Then you're going to submit the course section and then the student course section enrollment. Lastly, you can do the post-secondary. Now, the post-secondary has no relationship with the other 4 file types. So you can submit it at any time. You can submit it before you start the other 4. You can submit it in the middle. The post-secondary really has no reflection, no impact on the other file submitted. So, there are key terms when you talk about ESSA. You have the ineffective teacher. These are teachers who are misassigned. And the reason why we go over this slide is this is kind of the impetus for assignment monitoring or the change in assignment monitoring several years ago. So you have ineffective teachers are teachers who are misassigned, placed in a position where the employee does not hold a legally recognized certificate or credential, right? We know that assignment monitoring looks to identify those teachers based on other factors or several factors. Out-of-field teachers, teacher who has not yet demonstrated subject matter competence in a subject area. And then inexperienced teachers, this is our state's definition, who has 2 or fewer years of teaching experience. And then charter school credentialing. All charter school teachers must obtain a certificate of clearance to demonstrate their professional fitness. If your charter school teachers already have a SEED, they're credentialed, they don't need a certificate of clearance. However, if you have charter school staff who are not yet certificated, you can get them a certificate of clearance that gives them a SEED, which allows you to report them. All charter school teachers must obtain the certificate required for the teaching assignment by 2025.